January 1947, Ross Sea, Antarctica. I was 24. I had served in the Pacific 2 years earlier, but this place felt different the moment we crossed the pack ice. The light stayed low. The cold pushed through every layer. Our order said we were part of Operation Highjump, a large Navy mission to map the coast in teaser. That was the official story. The real reason my team flew inland was written on a single sheet I signed without questions. We were told to reach a silent zone on the ice where earlier parties had gone missing. No talk of radio trouble. No talk of strange signals. Only a direct instruction to reach that place, take photographs and return fast. We moved toward that sector with a simple goal and a small crew. The officers kept their faces flat, but their eyes gave me the feeling this was not routine work. I felt it too when the horizon ahead showed nothing at all, like a blank window cut into the world. Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. I first saw Antarctica from the deck of the carrier when we pushed south of the pack ice. The air had a clean bite that cut into my nose. The engines below kept a steady throb that I felt through my boots. I had been at sea before, but this place worked on a man in the slow, heavy way. The horizon sat flat and pale with no shape to guide the eye. It made distance hard to judge. It made time feel long. I was a trained aviation radio man, but on this mission, my role leaned more toward navigation and photography support. Our aircraft was a ski-equipped Douglas transport, sturdy and simple. My crew had a pilot from Michigan, a quiet man with steady hands, a co-pilot who had never flown this far south, a crew chief who carried tools like they were part of his own bones, and a photo interpreter who saw meaning in every shadow. We had worked together only a short time, but isolation forces men close even before the danger starts. The oars we followed in those early days looked harmless. We practiced landings on the ice. We took long passes over cliff lines. We photographed cracks, shelves, and wind-carved ridges. Most of it felt like training meant for younger crews. Nothing about those flights explained why the officers studied our tracks each night with such careful attention. They said we were building a clear picture of the coast. They said nothing more. Life on the carrier stayed simple. My bunk was narrow. The metal walls stayed cold enough that my blanket stuck to them if I pressed too close. The smell of diesel drifted through the lower decks every morning when the engines warmed for flight operations. I grew used to it, but sometimes it mixed with the sharp cold air that swept in when hatches opened, and the two smells together made me think of something unfinished, waiting beyond the horizon. The first hint of the dead sector came during a routine run. We were flying north of a wide crack system when one of the officers asked for readings in a region that had no clear markings on our chart. The sheet showed nothing there, only a faint pencil box added by someone before we boarded. The pilot read the coordinates twice and gave a short nod. We turned toward the box without questions. Everything looked normal at first. Snow stretched out in a clean sheet. Shadows stayed soft. The engines kept their steady rhythm, but the air felt heavy. The sky looked too even. The pilot said the horizon ahead looked flat as old glass. It was the kind of comment men make when they sense something off but cannot name it. We held that course until our bearings drifted a little. Nothing sharp, nothing frightening, just a slow shift that did not match the movement of the aircraft. I checked our instruments one by one. They sat steady enough. The pilot adjusted forcefully like he wanted to shake loose from a grip. The interpreter held his camera but did not press the trigger. He kept looking through the window as if waiting for the land to change shape. When we returned to the carrier that afternoon, the deck crew moved us into the hangar without delay. The operations officer walked in with a clipboard tucked under one arm. He asked the pilot a few direct questions about wind, light, and altitude. Nothing unusual, but then he drew a narrow line on a private chart. He did it while speaking about something unrelated, like he did not want us to watch his hand. I noticed the pilot watching it. Anyway, later that night, while I checked equipment, I heard small talk among the crew. Most joked about old stories of German expeditions before the war. A few said those groups had claimed land deeper inland. None of us believed any of that. Yet, the older men spoke with more care. One chief said the survey flights done before the war had sent back odd readings that never reached the general reports. He said it quietly. He did not look up while saying it. I tried sleeping early, but the constant vibration of machinery under the deck made rest difficult. It was a slow through that rose and fell in a way I had not noticed before. It seemed out of step with the engines. I assumed it was only tired nerves. The cold seeped through everything, even inside the ship, and my thoughts were slow. Over the next days, we ran more flights along the same region. Each pass left us with the same feeling of unfinished space ahead, as if the land wanted to hold something out of sight. The pilot brought us back each time with tight shoulders. The interpreter had more photographs than usual, but he kept many of them in a separate envelope that he passed straight to the officers. No one explained why. By the end of that week, we received a message calling our crew to a private briefing. They told us to prepare for a longer flight inland. The tone was calm, but the officer's eyes stayed fixed on the table instead of our faces. He explained the mission plainly, reached the blank zone, photograph everything, and returned before weather turned. He said nothing about the old stories. He said nothing about the crews who had vanished earlier in the season. We knew their names, though. Men do not forget when others go missing. Their absence sits with you, even if no one explains the reason. I walked out onto the open deck after the briefing. The cold struck my face the instant I stepped outside. I looked toward the ice sheet that stretched out past the horizon. It felt like we were stepping closer to a place that did not want to be found. We moved off the carrier 2 days later and set up a small camp on the ice shelf. It stood about 100 miles inland from the ship, far enough that the sea felt like another world. The camp was simple. A few canvas tents, a small stove, fuel drums stacked along a snow wall. One track tractor stood nearby with its motor wrapped in heavy cloth. Every breath turned the air sharp. Every sound felt smaller under the open sky. I slept in a narrow tent with the crew chief and the photo interpreter. The cold pushed in from every side. At night, I kept a wool scarf tied around my face so my breath would not freeze on the inside of the canvas. The place had a smell that was hard to forget. The generator burned fuel with a sour edge, and that smell mixed with a clean cold in a way that stayed in my nose. It became the scent of waiting. The CBS built a small radio hut near the edge of the camp. They ran a short mast, drove anchors, and packed snow around the base. The equipment hummed with a low, steady beat that made the walls shake a little. I slept close enough to hear it through the night. It was the kind of sound that worked its way through ribs and stayed there. The officer in charge of the land group met with us on the second evening. He carried a tight folder and never looked away from it for long. He explained the plan again step by step. At first light, we would lift off, move directly toward the blank region on our charts, and continue until fuel forced to turn back. If we found a safe place to land, we were to test the ice and set markers. That part interested the CBS more than it did me. They handled groundwork with a kind of calm only long winters could teach. The officer kept saying the same line. Clear photographs, clean passes, simple worked. His voice stayed even, but something in it felt tense, like he wanted to keep the words from slipping. That night, I checked our gear alone. I tested the cold weather suits. I laid out spare batteries. I went over our notes for bearings and distances. Everything looked normal. Nothing on the paper showed danger. Yet, I felt uneasy in a way I could not explain. The ice beneath me felt too thick and too quiet. When I stepped outside, the sky looked empty in all directions. The land seemed to stretch without shape or end. The Seabs launched a weather balloon just before dawn. It rose in a straight line until it passed into a layer of pale cloud. Then the signal weakened. The chief frowned. He adjusted dials and checked his watch. The balloon should have given steady readings, yet the numbers did not match. They looked broken, like someone had scratched through them with a dull knife. After a short climb, the balloon stopped sending any data at all. No one said anything for a moment. The interpreter brought out the photographs from the last 2 flights. He spread them on a folding table. Most images showed what you would expect from this part of Antarctica. Smooth ridges, wind lines, ice pressure folds. But a few prints caught my eye. A basin shape sat in the distance on one frame, small but too regular. The interpreter had circled it with pencil. He tapped the circle twice, then placed his finger on the blank spot of our map that matched its location. The officer saw it and closed the folder as if that settled the matter. The camp grew colder as the evening came. The wind picked up enough to make the tent ropes groan. I tried to sleep, but kept waking to check my watch. Every hour felt stretched. The hum from the generator found its way through the snow wall and into my tent, a slow, uneven rhythm that matched nothing around it. I pressed my hands together for warmth and listened to it until sleep finally caught me. Just before dawn, a runner shook my shoulder. Light was coming. We had to move. I pulled on my heavy boots and stepped outside. The air stung my face. The aircraft waited on a level patch cleared by the CBS. The skis rested on hard blue ice with a thin layer of snow brushed over it. The engines were already warming. Their noise sent a faint tremor through the ground at my feet. The pilot stood next to the nose of the aircraft and checked the propellers. His expression stayed calm, but his jaw was set in a way I had not seen before. The crew chief loaded our gear. The interpreter carried his camera case and a small notebook filled with tight lines of writing. I held a simple checklist folded in my hand. We moved without talking. The cold made conversation short anyway. As the engines climbed in pitch, the smell of fuel thickened around us. Warm exhaust drifted out in slow waves and mixed with the freezing air. That mix settled into my memory. It always marked the moment before something important happened. Before we boarded, the officer in charge spoke again. He told us not to drift off course, not to chase shadows, and not to assume safety if the land looked calm. He said the blank region could play tricks on distance. He made sure each of us understood. The pilot nodded once. We climbed into the aircraft and took our seats. The metal floor felt colder than usual. I buckled in and watched the CBS move back from the skis. The interpreter checked his camera. The pilot leaned forward and advanced the power. The aircraft started to glide across the ice. The camp slid past my window. The horizon ahead showed nothing but a wide, pale sheet that met the sky in a straight line. It looked too open, too smooth. Our course pointed directly toward the silent region we had studied in the tent the night before. There was no turning back now. We lifted off with a slow climb. The skis brushed the ice, then slipped free. The land opened beneath us in a wide sheet of white that stretched without end. The air inside the aircraft felt tight. No one spoke. The pilot kept a steady hand on the controls, and the co-pilot followed each small shift with quiet focus. I watched the horizon for any change in shape, but nothing moved except our shadow. The engines kept their firm rhythm. Their sound pressed through the metal skin and into my legs. I had flown many times during the war, yet this flight carried a different weight. There was no smoke to dodge and no coastline to follow. Only empty land ahead that seemed to slide away as fast as we approached it. The cold inside the aircraft built slowly layer by layer. Even with gloves on, the metal felt sharp under my fingertips. We passed the first ridge line after about 1 hour. The ice below showed faint lines in long straight paths. They did not match any natural pattern I had seen before. The interpreter leaned toward the window and traced one of them on the glass with his finger. He kept his camera ready, but held off taking a shot. He knew we were still outside the main zone. The pilot checked his notes. We stayed slightly west of our last track, trying to avoid old ground. He kept glancing down at the compass, then out the front window as if measuring the sky by eye. The co-pilot wrote down each small drift. I monitored our readings and checked my watch. The numbers should have followed a simple rhythm, but they lagged by a few breaths at a time. I did not mention it. The pilot already sent something off. The first sign of the blank region arrived in a quiet way. The ice ahead lost all texture. The usual wind shapes and snow lines faded until the land looked smooth, like thick glass that caught no shadow. The pilot steadied the aircraft and told us to prepare for the long leg in. My hands felt colder, even inside thick gloves. The air in the cabin tasted dry and sharp. The interpreter opened his camera case, but kept it on his lap. He looked through the window with a fixed stare. The crew chief tightened the straps on our gear and checked the storage rack twice. The co-pilot made a small mark on his chart. The pilot adjusted our heading with a slow turn. The aircraft responded with a soft tilt. Nothing sudden, yet I felt the shift in my stomach in a way that held my attention. For the next stretch, the land remained blank. No cracks, no rise, no shadow. The engines felt louder in that emptiness. The throttle trembled faintly against the pilot's hand. The cold worked into my shoulders until they tightened on their own. The weight of the place did not come from weather. It came from the stillness. Time passed in a long, slow roll. The pilot kept track of fuel and distance. The co-pilot measured sun angle and checked it twice. I watched the subtle roll of the land. The wide surface seemed to sag, not in a natural bowl shape, but in a drawn-out drop that pulled the eye forward. It gave the impression of moving downhill without actually descending. I mentioned it to the pilot. He nodded once quietly. Then the land changed. It happened in a single breath. The blank surface broke into a wide basin cut into the ice. The shape was too round and the walls too even, like something carved to circle and let the snow settle over it. The depth ran far down, deeper than the height of any ship I had served on. The ice there looked old, tinted in faint blue and gray layers. Along the far edge of the basin, I saw dark shapes breaking through the ice. They rose in straight angles, not like rocks, but like pieces of a structure. The interpreter pressed his face to the window and lifted his camera. He took one photograph, then another, then paused to steady his hands. The pilot circled once to give him a clear view. The structure looked partly crushed under weight. Straight beams stuck out at odd angles. A section of wall slanted under the ice as if it had been frozen in place long after collapse. A broken mast lay half buried, its top pointing toward the basin floor. On one panel, I made out chip markings too faint to read, but arranged in a block pattern I had seen in pre-war manuals. The interpreter whispered one word under his breath, too soft for the pilot to hear. It sounded like German. The pilot kept a tight turn and glanced back at me. I nodded. He already knew he had stumbled onto something far beyond any weather station. He held the aircraft steady while the interpreter finished his photographs. The air inside felt colder now, as if the basin below drew heat out of us. We started our second pass when the right engine coughed. It was a single clear sound, not long, but sharp enough to freeze every thought. The pilot eased the throttle and checked the gauges. The needle on one line shook. The engine kept running, but it had a rough edge now. A thin smell of hot oil drifted through the cabin. It mixed with the cold air and stuck in my throat. It reminded me of mornings on the carrier deck when machinery pushed too hard against the cold. The pilot made a fast decision. He tilted the aircraft toward a flat stretch near the outer edge of the basin. The skis touched hard ice, bounced once, then slid in a long smooth line. The aircraft slowed until it settled in place with a slow shudder. No one spoke. The only sound came from the ticking metal as the engine cooled. We stepped out into the open air. The cold struck my face like a slap. The basin lay ahead with its carved shape and strange structure. The smell of warm oil drifted from the engine in thin wisps. It hung low in the icy air, heavy enough to cling to my coat. We stood there taking in the sight. The land held no wind. The silence was complete. The blank region showed its true shape and it was not natural. The interpreter closed his camera case. The crew chief checked the damaged engine with slow, careful hands. The pilot stared at the structure across the basin. He kept his breath low like he did not want to disturb the air. This was no simple mapping run. We knew that before the officers ever told us, but seeing that structure under the open sky made the truth hit with full weight. Something had been built here long before we arrived, and something had forced it to its knees. We were alone with it. We moved slowly toward the edge of the basin. The ice under our boots felt firm, but carried a faint vibration, like a steady breath deep below. The pilot walked ahead with a measured pace. The interpreter stayed close to him. I followed with the crew chief. The cold settled deeper with each step, and the wind stayed strangely still. It felt like the air itself was waiting. At the rim, the view dropped into a clean cut. The basin walls curved down in smooth lines without the rough breaks you expect from natural collapse. The depth reminded me of the height of a command tower on a large ship multiplied again. The ice layer shone in pale blue bands, each one pressed tight over the next. The dark structure lay on the far side, half swallowed by the ice. Straight beams hung out at angles that suggested a heavy fall. A bent frame rose from the snow like a broken rib. The interpreter knelt to take wide shots. His hands stayed steady, but he kept glancing toward the shadows under the ice shelf as if expecting movement. We followed the pilot along a shallow path carved by time. The closer we came to the structure, the more details appeared. Metal handrails fixed into old concrete, crushed timber posts frozen in a line. A doorway half buried, its frame twisted but still standing. The markings on the wall grew clearer in the shade. The chip paint formed straight black letters in a script I had seen in captured documents during the war. The interpreter brushed snow off part of the wall and nodded once. He did not say anything, but his face told